Do NBA preseason vibes matter? Does that really help you win games? And what's the trick as the NBA season goes on? Victor Wembanyama or Chet Holmgren? Who do you think will be better this season? Plus, I have a wild James Harden trade idea. All that and more on Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On NBA, your daily source for all things NBA from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us and making us your first listen. Appreciate you guys being with us and being a part of the show. Glad to have you with us as we continue with NBA preseason. So much to talk about. The season is right around the corner. There's basketball being played. I was pouring over box scores this morning. I was going over film clips, going over and catching up on things like, hey, Jarris Walker, 19 points. Let's go. All sorts of stuff for the real sickos out there. So excited.
What's your biggest preseason overreaction just based off of like one weekend of games?
Desmond Bane is going to win most improved player and be an all-star.
Okay. This is the play.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Well, today's show is brought to you by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50 plus infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. My name's Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network and co-host of Locked On Nuggets, joined by David Ramil, who I'm joined by every single week. He's co-host of Locked On Heat. We are recording this on Monday afternoon before the slate of preseason games, as well, we're living dangerously, not going to lie. Recording before games are being played in preseason makes me nervous, but we're going to get through it. We got lots to talk about today that kind of is a bigger scope than just, whatever is going on with that night's action, because to be honest, it's preseason. And while I do think preseason matters, I think there's a lot more that we can get into that's interesting. We'll talk about preseason vibes and do they matter and how teams can perform and kind of carry that forward into the season. We are going to talk about Victor Wembanyama versus Chet Holmgren, who are set to face off on Monday night. We'll talk about which one of those players we think will be better this season. And in the third segment, I came up with a wild, I think it's wild, James Harden trade idea. It may make a lot of sense to a lot of folks, but I wanted to bounce it off David and get his reaction. We'll talk about all that and more on today's show. We start with this, which is, David, I went to Nuggets practice today, and the vibes with the Nuggets are, to be honest, quite immaculate. I was kind of expecting the Nuggets to be like, yeah, no, we know we got a long road ahead, and honestly, the offseason was too short, and yeah, I'm a little hungover, and those types of things from celebrating the championship and playing until late June. But instead, the Nuggets really are kind of revitalized. Like, they seem eager to get back to work. Like, they want to play. The starters in particular apparently are just absolutely smashing in the scrimmages, which is not surprising given the lack of depth on the Nuggets, but it's also kind of a sign that they are pretty much seamlessly right back to where they were when the finals ended. That's notable because the Nuggets had a lot of new guys they were integrating last year, and it took them a little bit of a while. And Nikola Jokic talked about that. But the vibes and the energy with that Michael Malone, who's a pretty critical and always looking for a negative coach, he's been pretty much like, the vibes have been great. Like, the energy's been great in the gym. Like, we've had really great practices every single day. That's carried through with, I was listening to Locked On Hornets go on my way to the arena. And Doug Branson was talking about how it feels very different this year, that the energy that the veterans are bringing with that team, that Steve Clifford has talked about how this is the most talented team and how everyone is bringing a different kind of energy and excitement. And all across the league, I think you have all these types of situations. Locked On Rockets, same kind of deal. There's a totally new feeling with the Rockets under Ime Udoka and the kind of energy that they're bringing, the professionalism and the structure. And I just think it's kind of interesting to ask the question of, preseason is such a time for such high expectations and optimism. Yeah. And it gets tough once you get in because some of these teams are going to win and some of these teams are going to lose. And you start to find out that, yeah, you can be optimistic and like your team, but you just might not be as good as the team on the other side with the different uniforms. So there's a lot to kind of manage the season. But my first question for you is, like, am I getting too suckered in by the vibes? Am I getting too suckered in by the positivity that everyone is exuding? Because I'm pretty skeptical in general of these things, but I got to tell you, I feel like most teams, with the exception of a few, are in a really good place to start the season.
I think they do matter, and at the same time, and I hate to hedge this answer, they don't matter because they're not sustainable over the course of a long regular season. And injury will take place. There'll be a trade discussion. There'll be somebody grumbling for more playing, and then all of a sudden, whatever good vibes were available in the early October aren't there when you have to travel to your third game in 5 nights and you're on the road and you haven't been home and you missed your significant other. You're, again, all these different factors that affect these players over the course of an 82-game season. And then eventually the goodwill that was built up in October is going to evaporate. So I like the good vibes. I'm a firm believer that they should be there, and it's an encouraging sign. But what is more important to me is something that I learned in PR in a former life, which is it doesn't matter that they're good vibes. You can have people disagree with the message, but there has to be a consistency in the message and the way it's delivered to everybody else. And that's what needs to come across from the coaching staff, from the front office, from the players themselves, whether you're on a 10-day trying to earn your spot in the NBA or you're a multi-year veteran, an all-star, all-NBA player. You need to understand what your purpose is there for, and you need to be consistently buying into that, whatever that goal might be, whether it's to win a title, whether it's to win as many games, whether it's understanding your place in the hierarchy of each team. That is, I think, much more important to build off of over the course of a season.
David, warming up for the church of heat culture there with the discussion of consistency and playing night to night in the NBA. But I think he's right. No, but you're right, though, where it's easy to be excited, I think, in November. And there are a number of, in October and November, there are a number of teams that I've started referring to as mirror teams. And what that refers to is you're playing great. You're over, like, everyone's like, look at the surprising team. Like, they're way better than we expected. And then around December 15th, as the schedule starts to set in, they catch a glimpse of themselves in the mirror and they see themselves and they go, we're not very good. No, we're the Wizards. Oh, that's a bummer. And it just kind of catches up with them where they kind of realize, like, that optimism was mostly feels and not anything substantial. And the way that vibe carries over into actual performance is through what you're talking about, which is the consistency and the execution. It's the attention to details, and it's the professional focus. And I talk a lot over on Action Network on my other podcast, Buckets, about how much motivation is a key factor in NBA performance. Like, how motivated are you on any given night? And I think everybody's motivated in preseason to the degree that, like, you're not going all out, but like, you want to play well. Like, you don't want to start off the season 0-6, right? Like, everybody's motivated early on, but the question is, like, are you going to have that motivation to break the 3-game losing streak when you're on the road in Milwaukee in January? Are you going to have that willingness to be like, let's make this 4 wins in a row when you're facing, the Celtics on a tough night? Or, the other way, which is just like, hey, you've been going 500 over the last 10 days and you're facing the Magic, the Hornets, and the Spurs. Like, you could win all 3 of these games, but you got to put that effort in. You have to be able to carry some of that force. So I think what I love what you said there about the consistency, because it's channeling this energy in preseason into that, right? It's like the ability to take all of the, like, this is really fun, and put that into mechanics where you can carry that forward when it doesn't feel as fun because you've been doing it every other night for the last 3 months.
Yeah. I think Houston is a really interesting team. And I know a lot of people will say, oh, we're going to pile on Houston again. They've earned that. At the same time, I think both of us are optimistic about what they can be. But that's a really interesting litmus test, like one of those mirror teams that you referred to. How do they sustain that? The good vibes are there now. The positivity is there. Udoka's there. He's brought a new energy. They've got a lot to build off of. But how can they weather that storm that invariably will come at some point during the season, at least once, if not multiple times, when there's an injury to a good vibes guy, when there's, somebody wants to get more playing time because he suddenly finds himself on the bench, when they're on that long losing streak, or they're traveling through these wintry cold places, they can't catch a break, and they're feeling down as a human being. So it's a really interesting. What other teams do you see? Because I've never really heard that term, the mirror. But I like it. Do you see other teams that are kind of like riding that bubble where right now vibes can carry them through November, but come an obstacle in their path, we'll probably see them to be much more like the team that they actually are rather than what they were early on?
Well, sometimes they're not, right? Because like a good counterexample of this is the Kings, where the Kings get off to that start last year, and
Yes.
we're like,
And they
and we're
kept
like,
building. Yeah, they rolled.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we're like, okay, like, hey, the Kings are pretty good, but like they'll probably come back to earth. Like they're not going to win the division. Like they're not gonna win. Like they're not gonna be like a top 3 seed. And then like the Kings are like, no, the beam is powerful. We have the beam, and the beam is what matters. And sure enough, like, and like, but that's like a really good example, right? Of like the beam is kind of a manifestation of that positive energy, right? The crowd's really into it. The players kind of took it on, like this whole energy, and they channeled that into their performance. And that to me is kind of like the counter example of this versus like a team. To me, it's the Hornets. That's the one that I look at and I'm most interested to see. Because like I like Steve Clifford as a coach. And to be honest, like I really like some of the veterans like Gordon Hayward and Terry Rozier. And despite the fact that I'm disgusted that he's back in the NBA, like Miles Bridges is a plus impactful player. Like I can't get around like many guys in the NBA. It's tough for me to be able to like dissect how to talk about him given what I know about his off-court problems, but I can't also like, I'm not being honest if I'm like he's a bad NBA player. No, like he was hugely impactful 2 years ago and he's back on the floor for them. But the question here is like, look, can they carry this momentum and this energy? Doug talked about them being sick of losing. And are they still going to be sick of losing if they're 4 games under 500 in January? Right? Like that's the type of the team that you wonder about. Can they kind of carry this forward? Okay. On the other side, we will talk about Chet Holmgren versus Victor Wembanyama. Big game on Monday night. We'll talk about which one of those players we think will be better this season. We'll do that on the other side on Locked On NBA. But first, I need to tell you about Jace Medical. So I wind up getting sick quite often. I have respiratory infections, and my wife gets sinus infections just about every single year. She works herself to the bone. She's a teacher, and she works herself so hard that she winds up getting these sinus infections almost every year. And she doesn't, because she's stubborn and doesn't like doctors, she doesn't go in. And then it gets worse, and eventually I have to drag her in kicking and screaming to go get an antibiotic. Well, the Jays case is able to solve that problem a little bit faster by giving you those antibiotics right up front with the help of a licensed medical professional. It's simple. You just go online, you fill out a form, and you get a prescription. Life-saving medication is delivered right to your door. The Jays case gives you peace of mind, so you're not just hoping that you got access to medication in an emergency. They make sure that you've got the medication in hand. You can get $20 off these life-saving antibiotics today from Jace Medical by using code LOCKEDON at checkout on jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Get $20 off those life-saving antibiotics at jacemedical.com. We'll be right back on Locked On NBA. Back here on Locked On NBA. Thanks for joining us. Matt Moore and David Ramil with you on a Tuesday. We're recording this on Monday afternoon. And David, tonight, Chet Holmgren takes on Victor Wembanyama, and listeners will be able to know how that matchup went. Want to ask you, talk about this. I wrote a thing for Action Network kind of comparing them. I talked to a bunch of scouts and league personnel about their various their body types. I was actually kind of pleasantly surprised. I thought there'd be more skepticism because, especially when you grant guys anonymity, which you do in order to get good opinions, they will take the opportunity to kind of crap on other teams' players just as a matter of like you get to. But instead, there was a lot of positivity about it. Like, especially I thought with both players, there was a discussion of their defense, which was like, I've been worried because of how thin these guys are. As an example, Holmgren's up to 208 from 195 last preseason. So he's up about 13 pounds of muscle, which is not probably enough. Like, it's going to take another 2 to 3 years. And 2 to 3 years will be like, man, Chet Holmgren's a tank, because that's what happens when you're in a strength and conditioning program and you get older. And by the time you're 23, it's like, oh, this guy's not the same kid he was. But even then, with these guys at their size right now, with these wingspans, there was, from the guys that have scouted them pretty consistently, a real confidence in what they're going to bring to the table defensively, which is they were just like, look, their defensive instincts are really good. Those guys are going to be rim protector and rim deterrence just by being there. Guards are not going to want to put up floaters with those guys around because they know that they can swat them. And having those types of presences, even if they're not a big body, huge Joel Embiid type enforcer, it's still really valuable to having that kind of length, and that's going to help those teams be better. I have a lot more questions about offense, and I think the other people do too, where they have a lot of guard skills. For me, I'm a little bit more confident in Chet Holmgren. I'll just go ahead and say, like, I think Chet might be better than Wembanyama this season. I'm not for sure. Like, I'm not putting this out as a hot take, as in, like, Chet Holmgren will 100 times be better. No, like, Wembanyama could definitely be better. He's the number one high prospect since Anthony Davis, if not LeBron. But Chet's got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So, like, you can run pretty clear and clean sets to get Chet good opportunities. You can run pick and pop. You can run him off of screens. You can run pick and roll and just have him lob. You can do a lot with Chet Holmgren versus Victor Wembanyama. He's got Trey, and he's got, Devin Vassell just on the new extension, and Keldon Johnson. But those guys aren't, like, really great playmakers. And so I worry about the spacing. I looked at a lot of San Antonio's numbers, and they kind of suggest that the Spurs are still really lacking in spacing as far as three-point shooting goes. And I worry that they're going to be able to, all those guard skills that Wembanyama's got, the crossover step back jumper that made all the highlights, that's harder when you're in tight, cramped space because teams don't respect the spacing around you. So I'm going to contend that I actually think Chet Holmgren might have a better rookie season than Victor Wembanyama.
I think he will be the better player. I don't think he'll have the better statistical season, though. And I think it's for the same reasons that you just mentioned. When you've got the depth and the not the supporting cast, you've got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, one of the best players on the freaking planet. And we saw that, and we've seen that over the course of his career. He's going to be taking a lot of the shots. They're not going to be going through Chet to the same extent that San Antonio is going to be trying to incorporate Wembanyama. And as much as Pop is going to try to play a more egalitarian style because of Vassell, because of Trey, and because of everybody else in that roster, they're not. I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of Victor putting up bigger numbers and having bigger games over the course of the season. Now, I think it's going to be a great conversation. Unfortunately, these two players are probably going to be linked for a long time because of their physical type, because of the fact that they're both hyped up stars at this point early in their careers, because they've got a lot of potential there. But I don't see that Holmgren is going to be able to put up the same kind of numbers as Wembanyama is likely to, because of the reasons that we just mentioned. I think it's going to be much more different. They're going to try win games in Oklahoma City. I don't think that's the priority in San Antonio this season. They're going to try to see what they've got in Wembanyama and build through him and establish a baseline for the future. And that being the case, we'll probably see a much higher level of production from Victor than we will from Chet throughout the season.
Are you comparing Victor Wembanyama to Jalen Green? Is that what you're doing here? Is that the No, because they actually have some stability in San Antonio, not in Houston. So they know what they're doing there. They've been doing it for a while. Look, very good article. I just wanted to, as an aside, we're well known in our Jalen criticism. We've gotten aggregated quite a bit on the show for the Jalen Green takes. Very good article with Jonathan Fagan from the Chronicle, one of the best beat writers in the business, with Jalen Green talking about his approach to the season. I'm optimistic that I think Jalen's turned a corner in terms of being an impact player. He'll
stay off the bench then. He'll stay off the bench. He won't be the sixth man of the year.
Right. Getting back to Wembanyama, I think I'm just moving on. I think it'll be interesting to see kind of the rebounds of the other kind of a question that I think are fair, because there is this idea of like, what's going to happen when you get boxed out. And I think a good example of this, here's like a good example of like your average minute in the NBA. There's a pretty decent chance that DeAndre Jordan is actually going to spend time to start the season at backup center for the Nuggets again. It'll end by Christmas. I think DeAndre Jordan is a very good locker room guy, but the numbers are what the numbers are in terms of his plus minus. I said that he would be out of the rotation by Christmas last year, and he was. He had some very key moments for them late in the season in the playoffs. The reason I bring it up is like DJ is a below average starting center, but DJ is also huge. DJ is a big dude that knows how to box out. Like the one thing that DJ can do is he can rebound. But DJ is also 35, and DJ is also not as spry as he used to be. And so the question here becomes, can Victor's athleticism and wingspan compensate for DeAndre Jordan's size? It's not about I'm not talking about whether they win those minutes or lose those minutes. I'm talking about just if you're trying to battle for a rebound, does Victor's wingspan win out versus somebody who is stronger and tougher? Let's upgrade it from DeAndre considerably. Let's go to PJ Tucker, right? Who's going to absolutely put that backside. Victor can still just reach over him and grab the ball. And if you watch the Metropolitans games and the Summer League, there were a lot of cases of that where Victor got shoved out of the way, but still grabbed the rebound, because he's got
big,
the arm, the wingspan of a pterodactyl. And so like that, I think is part of what we're trying to counter here is can Victor's natural length, and this is the same thing with Chet, can those things compensate for the lack of core strength? I think is really what it gets down to, that they're going to face when they're getting beat up by a lot of these bigger guys in the NBA.
I think it's going to be a work in progress. And I mean, again, and that seems like a hedge, but I think that's fair. It's like, you have to understand that they're young, they're still developing, their bodies are changing, and they're not ready for the rigors. They're not ready to face those challenges, but they'll have the kind of physical tools that will earn them some advantages on occasion. But over the long haul, they're going to need to continue to improve and develop. And look, they're both in good situations that will allow them to do so. So you can remain optimistic about their long-term future also recognize the fact that they're going to be taken advantage of at certain times during the course of the season, because they're still so young, because they're still developing, and because they have those kind of clear physical disadvantages against them.
On the other side,
is that too fair? Is that too balanced, too nuanced? Maybe I should be a lot more hot takey.
Oh, we got plenty of time for that, David. I'll get you to hot take as when we're doing those 11:30 Eastern shows, and in the middle of November, and you're not feeling great. I'll goad you into those hot takes to get us aggregated. We got to warm up, buddy. We got to ease it. We have lots of time for context now. We're not in season. We got to wait to really turn the burners up. On the other side, I have a wild James Harden trade suggestion that I want to try out with David. We'll talk about that on the other side on Locked On NBA. Back here on Locked On NBA. Thanks for joining us, making this part of your day. Appreciate you guys being with us. Matt Moore and David Ramil with you on a Tuesday, recording this on a Monday afternoon. If you're joining us on YouTube, you can join the show. Just go to youtube.com/LockedOnNBA and you can catch the show. Later this week, we got John Corrales and Jake Madison tomorrow. Always a great show. You got Pat the Designer and Nick Angstadt on Thursdays. Great episode of Locked On Bulls talking about Kobe White, by the way, that I listened to on the way in. And on Fridays, Wes Goldberg, David's partner, and Adam Mares, my partner, in a very weird way that Nick Angstadt designed these shows. On Friday, we'll wrap up your week in Locked On NBA. So I mentioned I have a weird James Harden trade idea. And maybe it's not crazy. I think it's at least like a little bit bold. It works straight up. The Sixers would ask for more, so they'd probably ask for they would ask for too much. Let's just be real here. They would ask for too much because that's what Daryl Morey is going to do with the situation. But to me, it solves a lot of problems. And to me, honestly, it solves a lot of problems for both teams. So here's the idea. All right. DeMar DeRozan, a heavily protected first-round pick, and maybe one of the Bulls' younger guys. The problem with that is like Daryl Morey would be like, I want Patrick Williams, and that's like a non-starter. You can't trade Kobe White or Ayo Dosunmu until I believe December 15th, if not January 15th. I believe that's the condition on his salary. On the new deals that they got. Maybe Dalen Terry, who hasn't looked very good in preseason action. Maybe that's the 18th overall pick. Maybe that's the inclusion there for Harden if the Bulls are willing to go in that direction. Here's the argument. Okay. Both players are on an expiring contract. So both guys, like, it'd be a 1 year and possibly out. Now, Harden's going to want the max extension from Chicago, but it puts him in a make good condition, right? Where he's got to come in and he's got to take a team with Nikola Vucevic and Zach LaVine and Pat Williams, and I guess Kobe White, and Alex Caruso, right? And you got to take them and maybe make it to the second round. And at that point, maybe Chicago's like, hey, we like the success. We think this is big. But what it also allows Chicago to make an easier transition out of the DeMar DeRozan era without necessarily having to commit long term. There's been a lot of conversation about them wanting to move on from Zach LaVine. Like, the more likely trade is honestly Zach LaVine to the Sixers. Like, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if there was a deal done for Zach LaVine to the Sixers because they've wanted to move him. That's a star level player that Daryl Morey could probably justify. Again, they're going to want more. Like, Morey's going to be like Dalen Terry and first round picks because Morey is going to project that he has more leverage than he actually has here. It's just what he's going to do. And he's trying to keep Joel Embiid intact, right? You trade for DeRozan, and Joel Embiid is probably pretty satisfied. Like, he's probably pretty excited about that team up because DeMar is a universally beloved player amongst the NBA players. No one dislikes playing with DeMar DeRozan. No one dislikes it. He is very well liked by teammates. He's beloved in the locker room. He is known as like a genuinely good person. This is not a fake thing either. Like, DeMar DeRozan is genuinely regarded as a really good person. And having him go to the Sixers, look, he's a really great passer. He would work well with Embiid in terms of pick and roll. Is the 3-point shooting a little bit of a problem? Yeah. Is it go against Morey's principles in terms of wanting to optimize 3-point shooting? Absolutely. Going to be a little bit of a problem. Is that still a better option than some of these things that are on the board? Would I rather have DeMar DeRozan than Terrence Mann and 2 second-rounders or swaps from the Clippers, and Markieff Morris, which is about all they're going to get? Marcus Morris, I'm sorry, in that potential trade. So for me, like, I really like the idea of the Bulls having an opportunity to be like, look, let's try and upgrade. We'll get Harden, LaVine. He gets a pick and roll partner with Vooch. The defense gets worse, but we have Alex Caruso to put next to him. We make this run, and if it doesn't work, we let him go. The salary gets out of here, and we pivot. That to me seems like a pretty good solve for a Bulls team that doesn't appear to be going anywhere serious, and it gets the Sixers a replacement all-star.
I'm trying to think, even as you're talking here, I'm trying to think of like reasons not to like this deal. And I honestly can't think of many. I think it's a very fair deal. I was trying to envision from both sides there, and it seems like both of them will lose in some regard, perhaps, but also gain something that they might need. And I like the fit, particularly in Philadelphia. I mean, DeRozan would start at the 2, right? Given that lineup, it would be Maxey, him, Tobias, PJ Tucker, and Embiid. I mean, is that a workable lineup? I mean, defensively, there would be some concerns there, but I guess that would be solid enough. I guess it could hold its own. And I guess this is just presupposing, again, that Harden would accept this deal. It wouldn't be problematic and wouldn't try to force his way again from Chicago to, say, the Clippers. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the idea here is like, look, it's a big market. You get a big market team. The Bulls are a more attractive franchise than most. They've fallen quite a bit, obviously, since the Jordan days. Great job by the Reinsdorfs. All these things are it's not LA. The weather's not as nice, right? It's not Houston, which is where he wanted to go originally. The weather's not as good, but it's still a major market. You get a big team. You're still on the playoff squad. And to be quite honest, like, if you are the player that you think you're capable of being, and Harden clearly thinks that he is, one, this team is better built to mask some of your problems than others in terms of you do have Alex Caruso. Like, again, anyone listening to this is going to be like, Matt, they have Nikola Vucevic and Zach LaVine. I am telling you that they had Zach LaVine, Vucevic, and DeRozan, who is 34 and not a good defender, and they were the 6th best defense last year. Like, I like Billy Donovan overall as a coach, but one of the big things here is that Billy Donovan is a hell of a coach in defending pick and roll with drop coverage. And that's the one thing Vucevic is good at. It's the one thing, to the point where if you're Harden, you can be, to pardon my language, the lazy ass that he is going around screens, and you'll still do fine because you've got Alex Caruso to help out from the wing side and Pat Williams to help out from the weak side. And if you have good enough help from the corners, this is honestly why the Bulls were really good before Lonzo got hurt, was if you have Caruso and Lonzo on either side, they help over and are able to help and recover to the shooters. So you don't give up as much in pick and roll as you'd think. The transition stuff would be nasty. No question about it. The Bulls would also play at a glacial pace, which Harden's very comfortable with, and would be okay. Like, the big loser here is probably Zach LaVine. Is that like Harden's going to just do Harden things, and Zach LaVine, who I think has suffered next to DeRozan. But you want to know what the benefit is? You get a pure 3-point shooter, which they desperately need. Like, Locked On Bulls was talking about how a lot of the offense looked a little bit more modern in the preseason game. And I kind of think there's some capacity there for all of Harden's faults, he's at least going to be like, he's going to shoot a lot of threes and he's going to maintain spacing, especially when he's off ball. He's only going to spot up from 3. he may disengage, but at least he's out there. And so to me, like, I actually kind of think this is a gamble worth taking if you're the Bulls.
I mean, Harden Vooch pick and roll, I think is just really nice possibilities there. I mean, I like it. I think you solved it, man. Just last week we saw it. We talked about the Harden situation, how toxic it was, but I think you finally fixed it. You know, you got that GM opportunity. Yeah. You should take it because that was really, you really solved both teams' problems there. I can't, you know, it really addresses, it ticks a lot of boxes there. So that's a job well done.
There's probably something like a former like Adidas executive works for one of these teams and doesn't, or for like the Bulls and doesn't make it work, or like there's some sort of long-standing beef between one of DeRozan's. Like, this is how this stuff always goes in the NBA. There's always like these backstories that are like super hidden and on the down low that wind up being like a really big deal in these conversations. But I don't know. I thought it was at least an interesting concept. I'm sure that both Bulls fans and Sixers fans will hate it, which is how you know it's a good deal. That's gonna wrap it up for Locked On NBA. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you guys being with us. We'll be back next week. You can catch John Corrales and Jake Madison tomorrow. Go to lockedon.com. I'm sorry, youtube.com/LockedOnNBA for the latest on our video shows. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe. We'll see you guys again next time on Locked On NBA.